I didn't marry a monster. I married a man who knew how to pretend he wasn't one. People love to say, "Why didn't you leave?" as if leaving is a door you walk through with your dignity still intact. But they never ask, "Why did he hurt you?" Because men like Michael don't look evil, they look ordinary. They smile at neighbors, mow the lawn, fix the basement sink, and crack jokes at cookouts. Nobody suspects the man who grills burgers and compliments your dress to be the same man who grabs you by the hair at midnight because dinner was overcooked. When you're 20, you think love is passion. When you're 30, you think love is compromise. But when you're 50, you realize love shouldn't make you wish you'd never been born. I used to think I was strong. I raised 3 kids, worked double shifts, buried both parents, and still managed to put a meal on the table every night. But strength isn't what keeps women like me alive. Fear does. Fear teaches you to count footsteps, measure silence, predict storms before thunder cracks. Fear tells you which words to swallow and which breaths to hold. And fear convinces you that survival means staying small, invisible, quiet enough to avoid the next explosion. I used to pray he'd stop drinking. Then I prayed he'd stop hitting. Now, I just pray for the night to pass without either of us dying. Last week, he accused me of cheating with a man whose name I don't even know. He dragged me across the hallway carpet, and I felt my skin burn. Not from the friction, but from the shame of knowing my body couldn't fight back anymore. I don't cry when he hits me. I cry when he sleeps afterward, peaceful and unharmed, while I sit on the bathroom floor with a towel pressed against my face, wondering if this is the night I'll finally give up. I didn't stay for love. I didn't stay for children. I stayed because after 50 years, starting over feels harder than dying. But yesterday I saw myself in a grocery store window, limping, shaking, wearing sunglasses indoors, and I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked like someone who'd already been buried, waiting for someone to shovel the last bit of dirt. I realized something terrifying. I'm not afraid of him killing me. I'm afraid he already has. I realized something terrifying, that somewhere along the way I stopped expecting a future and started rehearsing an ending, like every breath I took was simply a pause between catastrophes, and every sunrise was just another countdown to the moment he'd decide I wasn't worth keeping alive anymore. And the worst part wasn't that I feared his hands on my throat or the way his eyes hardened before he struck. It was that I didn't know whether I would scream if he killed me or thank him for the mercy of finishing what he started, because when you spend years being broken in increments, you don't fantasize about freedom, you fantasize about silence, and there is a difference between wanting to live and wanting the pain to stop, and I had long forgotten which one I wanted, but last night while I sat on the edge of the tub pressing cold water to the bruises on my cheek, I remembered a version of myself from decades ago, a woman with a laugh like church bells and hair that caught sunlight. With the arrogance of someone who believed she'd always be safe, and I wondered when she died, was it the night he first raised his voice, or the night he first raised his hand, or the night I realized I was more afraid of being alone than being hurt, because loneliness has a way of making monsters feel like home, and I let him turn my house into a mausoleum, burying pieces of me beneath apologies and promises that always expired before morning, and people think abuse is loud, that it's screaming and shattered plates and neighbors banging on walls, but real abuse is quiet. It's his hand on your arm in a grocery store, squeezing just hard enough to remind you that you belong to him. It's the way your friends stop asking if you're happy because they already know the answer but can't stand to hear you repeat it. It's the empty seat at your daughter's dance recital because he didn't want to go and you didn't want to go alone. It's the long sleeves in July, the makeup that turns purple into beige, the practiced smile that twitches when someone asks whether everything is okay at home, and you answer yes, because the truth feels like treason, and the truth feels like a death sentence if it reaches the wrong ears, and every time he hurt me he would say he was sorry, but not because he regretted the impact, only because he feared the consequences, and a man who apologizes to avoid punishment doesn't fear God, he fears witnesses, and I spent years being the perfect accomplice, editing my pain into something palatable, repackaging terror into accidents, like the night I fell down the stairs, slipped on a rug, walked into a door, the lies stacking like bricks, building a prison I convinced myself was shelter, and yet he never understood that every time he called me worthless, he was strengthening the part of me that could imagine life without him, because hatred can be a seed too, and it grows roots even in poisoned soil, And yesterday when I saw my reflection, not as a woman, but a ghost with skin, I realized I don't owe him the remains of my body just because he destroyed the beginning of it. I don't owe him devotion because he wore a ring with my name on it. I don't owe him forgiveness just because he confuses regret with ownership. And I don't owe him loyalty for staying alive through every bruise. Because survival is not loyalty, it is strategy. And when you survive long enough, you begin to plan. Slowly, subtly, the way a prisoner learns the guard's footsteps. And I have been planning, maybe not consciously, but every time I hid money in the pantry behind bags of flour, every time I memorized the hours he drank hardest, every time I kept a bag of clothes in the trunk of the car, every time I forgave myself in secret for wanting to leave. And maybe that's why the fear is shifting, turning from paralysis to movement, because the truth is that I am 50 years old, and I am tired, but tired is not the same as defeated, and I know the world doesn't make space for women like me, women who aren't young enough to be pitied or old enough to be ignored. Women who have wrinkles on their face and scars on their soul and still dare to want more than survival, because society expects us to endure with grace, to wear suffering like jewelry, to make sandwiches for the man who hits us and smile at children who will one day learn how to become him or tolerate him. But I don't want my daughters, or my sons, to inherit the quiet violence of endurance. I don't want them to believe that love is measured by how much pain you can absorb before collapsing. I don't want them to grow up thinking a man becomes a husband by becoming a warden and a woman becomes a wife by becoming a prisoner. And maybe that's why this time, when he grabbed me by the arm and shoved me against the wall, I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even look away. I stared at him, straight into the eyes of a man who believed he owned me, and I thought, you are not powerful, you are predictable, you are not a monster, you are a scared little boy who needs to break others to feel whole. And when he let go, expecting the usual collapse, I didn't fall. I walked past him, slowly, deliberately, and that tiny unsteady step felt louder than all the screams I never spoke. And when I reached the bedroom door, I realized that I wasn't afraid of dying anymore, because there are many ways to die, and I've already lived through the slowest one. And death is not the opposite of life, fear is. And the day a woman stops being afraid, the world should tremble, because a woman without fear is a wildfire, and she will burn down every cage ever built to hold her. And I don't know if I will escape, or survive, or simply disappear into another form of loneliness. But I know this. He may have broken my body, but he did not break my ability to imagine a life where I am not broken. And sometimes the smallest hope is enough to start a revolution. Even if it begins with nothing more than a bruised woman standing in a hallway, breathing, planning, waiting for morning, not because she expects peace, but because she intends to steal it. I woke up this morning with the taste of metal in my mouth, not blood, but the memory of it, the phantom echo of nights when I bit my tongue to keep from screaming, and the first thing I heard wasn't his voice or footsteps, but silence, a silence so heavy it felt like a presence of its own, watching, waiting, measuring me. And I lay there staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how many women before me had stared at the same cracks in different houses, different beds, different decades. Wondering if they too counted the fractures in plaster the way I counted fractures in my bones. Calculating how much pressure a body can endure before it doesn't heal anymore, before bruises become permanent and pain becomes personality. And death is not the opposite of life, fear is. And the day a woman stops being afraid, the world should tremble, because a woman without fear is a wildfire, and she will burn down every cage ever built to hold her. And I don't know if I will escape, or survive, or simply disappear into another form of loneliness. But I know this. He may have broken my body, but he did not break my ability to imagine a life where I am not broken. And sometimes the smallest hope is enough to start a revolution. Even if it begins with nothing more than a bruised woman standing in a hallway, breathing, planning, waiting for morning, not because she expects peace, but because she intends to steal it. I woke up this morning with the taste of metal in my mouth, not blood, but the memory of it, the phantom echo of nights when I bit my tongue to keep from screaming, and the first thing I heard wasn't his voice or footsteps, but silence, a silence so heavy it felt like a presence of its own, watching, waiting, measuring me. And I lay there staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how many women before me had stared at the same cracks in different houses, different beds, different decades. Wondering if they too counted the fractures in plaster the way I counted fractures in my bones. Calculating how much pressure a body can endure before it doesn't heal anymore, before bruises become permanent and pain becomes personality. Because the truth is that when abuse becomes normal, you stop asking, why is this happening, and start asking, how long can I last? And that question haunted me as I sat up slowly, waiting for the dizziness to pass, because age has betrayed me, my body is slower, my reflexes dulled, and the woman who once ran upstairs now grips railings like they're lifelines, not because she fears falling, but because she fears being too weak to stand again, and weakness is a death sentence in a house ruled by violence. And as I stood in front of the mirror peeling off my shirt to assess the damage, I saw a constellation of bruises blooming across my ribs, purple and green and yellow like diseased flowers, and I wondered how many layers of my skin remembered him, how many memories were stored in scar tissue rather than photographs, because no one photographs the truth, they photograph the illusion, the birthday parties, the holidays, the smiling family dinners where I sat beside him with my hands folded in my lap like a hostage pretending to be a guest. And people always believed what they saw because believing otherwise would require confrontation, and society would rather protect its comfort than confront its violence. So women like me become footnotes, cautionary tales whispered about in small towns, stories people use to scare daughters at night. Don't end up like her. As if ending up like me was a choice I penciled into a calendar, not a consequence of 1,000 tiny manipulations disguised as love. And I remember the first time he hit me, not because of the pain, but because of the shock. The shock of realizing that a man you loved could turn your body into a battlefield without hesitation, the shock of knowing that there were no witnesses, no judges, no jury, just two people and one truth, a truth he would rewrite before I even processed it. And I apologized, God. I apologized for making him angry, for forcing his hand, for upsetting him. And he hugged me afterward, whispering apologies into my hair, telling me he didn't mean it, telling me he loved me, and I believed him. Because people don't become prisoners overnight, they become prisoners slowly, through rituals of guilt and rituals of forgiveness, until the bars around them feel like architecture rather than confinement. And I convinced myself that love meant surviving, adapting, enduring, because no one told me that love wasn't supposed to hurt more than it healed. And now that I'm 50, I look at young women with their soft faces and fierce voices and I envy their certainty, their refusal to tolerate what my generation was taught to absorb. And I wonder if my daughters will inherit my fear or my strength, and which one is more dangerous, because strength without direction becomes desperation, and fear without escape becomes resignation, and I don't want them to be desperate or resigned. I want them to be free, but freedom feels impossible when you don't know what it looks like. And every time I thought about leaving, I saw a map with no destination, because what does a woman like me do alone, who hires someone my age with my experience, who dates someone with my scars, who trusts someone with my history? And I realized that abuse doesn't just break your body, it breaks your future, it breaks your reflection, it breaks your imagination, until all that's left is survival. And survival becomes a religion, with rituals and commandments and sacrifices. And I have sacrificed so much, my health, my confidence, my laughter, my identity, and I thought losing him would mean losing the last remaining structure of my life. But maybe structure isn't safety. Maybe structure is just familiarity, and familiarity is just captivity disguised as routine. And last night, after he stumbled drunk into bed and collapsed without bothering to lock the door or hide the evidence of what he'd done, I walked outside, barefoot, into the cold night air, and the world was so quiet, so vast, so indifferent to my suffering, that it terrified me, because the world doesn't wait for broken women, it doesn't pause to let them heal, it doesn't rearrange itself to accommodate their trauma. And I felt small, insignificant, but I also felt something else, something dangerous, a sense of possibility, the knowledge that if I walked far enough, long enough, I could disappear into a version of myself that wasn't defined by fear. And I stood there imagining a future where no one raised a hand to silence me, where I didn't flinch when someone reached for a cup, where sleeping didn't feel like surrender, and waking didn't feel like punishment, and tears slid down my face, not because I was sad, but because I realized how desperately I wanted that future, not in theory, not someday, but now. And when I walked back inside, I wasn't stronger, I wasn't healed, but I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years, awake to the possibility of escape, awake to the cost of staying, awake to the truth that if I don't leave soon, I will die here, maybe not tonight, maybe not next week, but eventually, inevitably, and no one will write my obituary with honesty, no one will say, she died because he killed her. They'll say, heart failure, or accident, or stress, because violence against women is always sanitized, always softened, always rewritten to protect the legacy of men. And I don't want to die in footnotes, I want to live in sentences, loud, unapologetic, unedited. And maybe that means leaving with nothing, sleeping in shelters, working crappy jobs, being lonely, being scared. But fear outside is different than fear inside. Fear outside is temporary, fear inside is permanent, and I deserve temporary, I deserve imperfect, I deserve uncomfortable, I deserve messy, I deserve real. And sitting here now, writing this with shaky hands and a heartbeat that doesn't know whether it's racing from dread or hope, I realize I don't need to be fearless to leave. I just need to be more afraid of staying than of escaping, and for the first time in years, I am, deeply, profoundly, horribly afraid of staying, because staying means disappearing, fading, erasing, dying a slow, unremarkable death, and I don't want my story to end in silence. I want it to end in motion, even if the motion is stumbling, falling, crawling, because movement is life, and silence is death, and I have been silent long enough. I used to believe that leaving would feel like freedom, like some dramatic moment where I would slam the door and walk into sunlight with triumphant music playing in the background, but the truth is that leaving feels like theft, like you are stealing fragments of a life you never truly owned, packing them into bags that are too small to hold all the versions of yourself you lost along the way. And as I quietly folded clothes into a suitcase I bought with cash so he wouldn't trace the purchase, I kept thinking how absurd it is that women have to plan their escape like criminals, mapping routes, budgeting dollars, memorizing shelters, rehearsing excuses in case they get caught, because abuse isn't just violence, it's surveillance, it's interrogation, it's the constant awareness that every decision you make will be inspected for signs of rebellion. And I realized how long I had been preparing without admitting it, saving receipts, hiding money, learning passwords, because survival teaches you strategy long before you are brave enough to call it escape. And I kept thinking about my mother, the way she stayed with a man who drank himself into rage every weekend, the way she died with bruises hidden beneath her cardigan, and how people whispered that she must have been weak, as if staying in the fire makes you weak instead of incredibly, painfully strong, because it takes strength to survive hell every day and still make breakfast, still pay bills, still hold a child's hand without trembling. And I wonder if she ever imagined a life outside that house. If she ever sat in a car at a red light and fantasized about not going home, because I do, I fantasize constantly, about cheap apartments with thin walls and freedom, about waking up tired but safe, about eating toast without fear of being asked why I burned it, about laughing without having to check if it sounds too loud, too careless, too happy, because happiness is suspicious in a house that relies on misery to function. And yesterday when I was grocery shopping, I stood in front of a shelf of canned soup for 10 minutes because I couldn't decide which one he would complain about less, and that moment hit me with such humiliating clarity, the realization that my entire life had been reduced to risk assessment, that I wasn't living, I was managing danger, mitigating outcomes, predicting violence. And when I came home with the wrong brand anyway, I felt the dread fill my stomach like cement because I knew there would be consequences, and I started apologizing before he even opened his mouth. And he didn't hit me, not that time. He just laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that made me feel smaller than any bruise ever did, and he said, "You're lucky I put up with you, and God, I wish he had hit me, because pain is easier to understand than humiliation." And I sat at the kitchen table afterward thinking about all the times I almost left, like the night I drove around the block for 2 hours because I couldn't find the courage to go far enough, or the time I walked into a shelter but lied and said I forgot something in the car and never returned. Or the night I packed a suitcase but unpacked it before he came home because I convinced myself that maybe he would change, that maybe the version of him I met 25 years ago still existed somewhere under the alcohol and cruelty. And I hate that I still think that, hate that my brain, conditioned by decades of apologies, still clings to the hope that a monster can be undone by love, as if love ever healed a man who doesn't want to be healed. And it wasn't until last week, when my daughter visited and asked if I was happy, that I realized how much I had forgotten how to lie convincingly, because the smile I gave her felt crooked, forced, like a mask that no longer fit the shape of my face. And I saw the worry in her eyes, the recognition, the dawning awareness that her father wasn't a difficult man, he was an abuser. And I wanted to tell her everything, every bruise, every threat. Every night I slept in the bathtub because the door locked from the inside, but I couldn't. Because I didn't want her to carry the weight of my suffering, and I didn't want her to hate someone she shares DNA with, because children are allowed to grow up before grief is forced on them, but adults don't get that privilege. And when she left, she hugged me so tightly that my ribs hurt, and after the door closed, I sank to the floor and cried, not from pain, but from the crushing guilt of knowing that if I stay, I'm teaching her that endurance is normal, that love is synonymous with suffering, and if I leave, I'm teaching her that freedom is possible, and maybe the generation after me doesn't have to inherit the same quiet violence. And that night, while he slept with his mouth open and his fists relaxed, I stared at the ceiling and realized that I'm not leaving because I'm brave, I'm leaving because I'm old. Because time is no longer a luxury, because my body can't withstand another decade of being thrown, grabbed, shaken, because trauma doesn't age gracefully, it calcifies, it becomes arthritis in the bones, migraines in the skull, tremors in the hands, heart attacks waiting to happen, and I don't want to die because I stayed too long in a life that kept shrinking until nothing remained but fear. And the world doesn't give second chances easily, especially not to women who are past 50, who are no longer considered beautiful or desirable or worthy of investment. But maybe I don't need a second chance, maybe I just need a first step, even if it's shaky, even if it's lonely, even if it's humiliating, because dignity isn't something you find fully formed, it's something you build piece by piece after shattering, and maybe that's what leaving is, not freedom but reconstruction, not triumph but survival with purpose. And as I zipped the suitcase shut, hearing the quiet click of a future I was terrified to try to build, I whispered to myself the sentence I have never allowed myself to say out loud: I don't want to die here. And saying it didn't make me brave, but it made me honest, and honesty is the first rebellion, the first wound in the wall, the first crack in the armor of a man who believes you're too scared to ever walk away. And maybe I am scared, petrified, but fear doesn't mean paralysis, fear means urgency. And I feel urgent in every bone, urgent in every bruise, urgent in every memory of the woman I used to be, and I know that when I walk out that door, he will hunt, he will rage, he will threaten, because men like him don't lose quietly, but I am prepared to be hunted if it means I finally get to run. I spent the next week living like a ghost in my own house, and the strange part was that I was not invisible because he made me invisible, but because I made myself invisible by choice. Because blending into the shadows felt safer than existing in the light. I pretended to be sick, I pretended to be tired, I pretended to be everything except alive so that I would not provoke him. And the children began to notice that their mother did not laugh anymore, that her eyes were always wet and red, that she sat with her back pressed against walls as if she needed something solid behind her so she would not collapse forward into the air. And Daniel pretended not to notice all of it because pretending was easier than facing the truth that he was no longer the charming husband or the good man or the father they admired. He was simply a violent man disguising cruelty as mood swings and temper or stress. And as the days stretched out, I realized the violence was no longer just physical, it was psychological, a suffocating fog that followed me into every room of the house, especially the bedroom where I sat awake at night, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and imagining my own funeral. Imagining my children standing beside a box of wood and crying while strangers whispered she should have left long ago. And the strange thing was that when I imagined my death, I did not imagine Daniel in handcuffs or crying or apologizing. I imagined him at the funeral with his hand over his heart, refusing to speak to people because he would say he was too devastated to talk, and everyone would believe him because men like him are always believed and women like me are always erased. And every night I told myself I would leave tomorrow, I would take the kids and go, I would run until my lungs burned and my heart gave up. But every morning I woke up and felt smaller, weaker, older, as if the night drained me instead of healing me. And one morning while brushing my hair I saw a thin streak of silver mixed with brown, and I stared at it for a long time because it reminded me that time was not waiting for me to decide, time was dragging me forward, whether I fought or not. And I realized with a kind of quiet horror that I was no longer 35 and strong and angry, I was almost 50 and tired and broken. And I wondered how many more years I had left before my body gave up from fear alone. And that afternoon I looked at my daughter sitting at the table drawing pictures of happy families with hearts floating over their heads, and I fought the urge to tell her that love does not save people, that love does not fix broken men, that love does not guarantee safety, that sometimes love is the weapon used to keep you from leaving. But I did not say anything because she deserved innocence for as long as she could hold it. And when Daniel came home that night, he was quiet, almost gentle, and he kissed me on the forehead and asked if I needed anything. And the sick, twisted part of my brain felt grateful for that small kindness, because when you live in abuse your standards for affection are so low that a man not hitting you feels like love. And I sat on the couch and watched him fall asleep next to me, and I stared at his face for a long time trying to remember the man I married, and I could not, because the truth was there never was a good man, there were only good moments, and women like me build entire lives out of moments instead of truth. And as I sat there I realized something terrifying, something that made my whole body go cold. The night he buried me alive in the yard, the night the dirt hit my face, the night I heard him whisper, "Don't leave me," I understood Something that I had been too afraid to admit. He would rather kill me than lose control of me. He would rather face prison than face rejection. He would rather my children cry at my funeral than watch me walk away. And I understood that I was not waiting for courage, I was waiting for permission, and he was never going to give it to me. And I think that was the moment something inside me shifted, not into anger, not into strength, but into survival. Because women like me do not transform into warriors, we transform into escape plans, quiet, secret, dangerous escape plans. And as I sat there with the television flickering across the room, I made a decision, not a heroic one, not a dramatic one, just a simple, cold one. I will leave, and I will not tell him when, I will not tell him how, I will not tell him where. And if he follows me, if he hunts me, if he becomes the monster I know he is, then he will discover something too late. I may have been weak, I may have been afraid, I may have spent 20 years silent, but I am not done breathing, and I will not die in the yard again, and I will not leave my children with a man who thinks love means ownership and violence and fear. I will not let my daughter grow up thinking a man's rage is affection or that a woman's silence is loyalty, and I will not let my son learn that fists are language, because children do not inherit genetics, they inherit behavior. And I refuse to leave monsters in the world, so I sat there in that room with the glow of the television painting the walls, and I whispered into the empty air, I am leaving, and I do not care if the world burns behind me. I am leaving, and I will not look back this time. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity, the kind of clarity that comes not from hope or inspiration but from exhaustion so deep it becomes a type of religion. And I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection, and I realized I no longer recognized the woman looking back at me, not because she was bruised or old or tired, but because she had become something terrifyingly calm, a calm that meant decisions had already been made and consequences no longer mattered. And I brushed my teeth slowly, methodically, like a soldier preparing for war, and while doing it I rehearsed every lie I would tell Daniel to keep him unsuspecting when I left in the coming weeks. Because leaving him was not a single moment, it was dozens of tiny rehearsed performances designed to convince him I was still loyal, still trapped, still his. And that morning at breakfast he was in a good mood, which used to make me relax but now only made me nauseous, because I knew his sweetness was not kindness but bait, a temporary peace designed to make me believe the monster did not exist, or worse, that the monster was my imagination. And the children sat at the table laughing and eating cereal, unaware they were living inside a ticking bomb. And I watched Daniel place his hand on our daughter's hair with such practiced gentleness that it made me cold, because I knew those same hands had wrapped around my throat with equal certainty. And I wondered how many monsters looked like good fathers, how many killers looked like good husbands, and I wondered if my children would ever forgive me for loving a man who could have destroyed all of us. And when he left for work, I stood by the window and watched him drive away, and the moment the car disappeared I dropped to the floor, not from sadness but from sheer release, because pretending to be alive around him required more energy than staying alive ever had. And I crawled to the drawer where I kept old documents, passports, birth certificates, photos of better days that never really existed, and I spread them all on the floor like evidence in a crime scene, because that is what my life had become, a long unsolved crime where the victim was forced to live beside her murderer. And I sat there shaking, not from fear but from decision, because I was not planning an escape anymore, I was executing one. And the thought that frightened me was not him finding me or killing me, but the possibility that I might not make it far enough to protect my children before he turned them into versions of himself, because violence is hereditary, not in blood but in behavior. And I could not watch my son become the man who hurt me, and I could not watch my daughter become the woman who forgave it. And I whispered to myself with a voice so steady it startled me, I am not running because I am afraid, I am running because I am finished. And that was the first time I knew with certainty that leaving was no longer an option, it was a deadline. I spent the next 3 days pretending everything was normal, pretending I was healed, pretending I was still the kind of woman who believed bruises fade and marriages can be fixed, when in truth I was already gone, my body still in the house but my mind somewhere far away, planning routes, highways, motels disguised as backups. And I moved through the house like an actress, memorizing lines, smiling at Daniel when he was looking and disappearing when he wasn't, because every second around him felt like walking barefoot through broken glass. And I kept thinking about the night he buried me alive, not because of the dirt on my face or the darkness around me but because of the way he whispered I love you while suffocating me. And I realized love from a man like him felt more like a funeral than a future. And the terrifying part was that he believed it. He believed the violence was devotion, he believed possession was affection, he believed my obedience was gratitude. And when he came home one evening and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, I fought the urge to scream, because the feeling of his breath on my neck made my whole body remember blood and dirt and the horrible stillness of death. I knew then that his love was not a feeling, it was an addiction, one that would kill me and anyone connected to me if I ever denied it. And my daughter walked into the room right in the middle of his embrace, and the way he stepped back quickly like a teenager caught doing something indecent made my stomach twist because monsters don't want witnesses, monsters only exist in secrecy, and she looked at me with a strange confusion as if she sensed something wrong but had no language for it yet, and I realized that children always know before adults admit they know. They see it in the way a mother flinches, they hear it in the pause before an answer, they feel it in the silence that settles after a door slams. And that night after the kids fell asleep, he sat on the couch drinking whiskey pretending to watch TV, and I sat across the room watching him, watching the man who could beat me, bury me, kiss me, hold me and still sleep peacefully beside me. And I wondered how many women died because they believed they could survive a man who enjoyed watching them break. And he looked at me suddenly with that half smile, the one he used before hurting me, and he said, "You're quieter these days." And I said, "I'm just tired." And he nodded like he already knew the truth, like he could smell rebellion the way animals smell fear, and he said, "You're not thinking about leaving, are you? Because we both know that wouldn't end well." And he said it with the same tone men use when joking with friends, but there was nothing playful behind it. There was a warning, a threat, a promise, and I answered no with a voice so steady I didn't recognize it, because liars must sound like believers. And he stared at me long enough to make my bones shiver, then turned back to the television laughing at a joke I didn't hear. And I realized in that moment that he would not let me leave simply because I wanted to survive. I would have to disappear without any trace, no emotion, no confrontation, no goodbye. I would have to vanish like a ghost, leaving behind nothing but clothing, memories, and a marriage certificate signed in blood and bad decisions. And that night, as I lay next to him pretending to sleep, I made a vow, not a poetic vow, not a romantic vow, but a vow made of steel. I will not die in this house, I will not be buried in this yard, and I will not give him the satisfaction of saying she stayed because she loved me. I will leave because I love living, and I will take my children because no child should grow up learning that love is a man with a fist and a woman with a bruise. The night before I planned to leave, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of Daniel's breathing, and every breath sounded like a countdown to something catastrophic, because I knew men like him didn't lose gently, they didn't surrender gracefully, they didn't allow freedom without turning it into punishment. And I replayed every moment of the last decade, every bruise, every apology, every threat disguised as a promise, every time he said I could never survive without him, and every time I believed him. Because abuse is not just violence, it is education. It teaches you to shrink, it teaches you to doubt, it teaches you to accept that life is suffering and that suffering is earned. And as I stared at the ceiling, I thought about the plan. I created a plan so quiet, so meticulous, so careful that it felt like I had been building it for years without realizing it. And at midnight I slipped out of bed to check the bags I had hidden inside the laundry room, the documents, the cash, the change of clothes, the burner phone I bought in a town 40 miles away just in case. And my hands shook, not from fear but from adrenaline, the kind of adrenaline that comes when survival stops being a wish and becomes a mission. And for a moment I almost felt proud of myself, proud of the woman who refused to die quietly, who refused to be found in a shallow grave, who refused to let her children become the next generation of violence. And I whispered to myself, "You are leaving, you are leaving, you are leaving," not as a mantra but as a spell, because leaving him required magic, a magic stronger than love, stronger than grief, stronger than death. And the universe must have heard me, because right then, right in the middle of my whispered freedom, the floor creaked behind me and I froze, not the freeze of fear but the freeze of prey, because prey doesn't run until it knows the predator sees it. And I turned slowly and saw Daniel standing in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the dim kitchen light, and for a moment his face was unreadable, because silence is the language of killers. And he said nothing, he just looked at me, looked at the bag on the floor, looked at my trembling hands, and something in his expression shifted, not anger, not rage, but recognition, the recognition that I was no longer his possession but his threat. And he walked toward me so slowly that every step sounded like a shovel hitting dirt, like the night he buried me alive. And I stepped back instinctively, but there was nowhere to go, because escape plans don't include being caught in the middle of the night by a man who has already killed you once. And he said, "I knew you we're planning something." I could feel it in the way you stopped crying and started thinking, and I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, I wanted to throw the bag through the window and sprint into the night. But trauma doesn't teach you to escape, it teaches you to negotiate. And he grabbed my wrist, not violently, not loudly, but with a grip so controlled it felt rehearsed, and said, "If you ever walk out that door, I won't kill you right away, I'll let you live long enough to wish I had." And his voice was calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that doesn't come from anger but from certainty. And he let go of my wrist as if releasing a pet, not a person, and walked back toward the bedroom without looking back. And I stood there in the dark, realizing something that made my whole body collapse. He didn't need to bury me again to kill me, he just needed to make me afraid enough to stay. And that was the moment I knew leaving wasn't just escape, it was war. And I wasn't leaving because I was brave, I was leaving because I was running out of time, and he wasn't going to lose me without blood. The next morning the house felt different, not because anything had changed but because everything had changed. The moment Daniel caught me with the bag and left me standing in the dark, I understood that there would be no second chance, no more quiet preparation, no more slow careful planning, because by sunrise he would either control me fully or destroy me completely, and he was already awake before me, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee, like any normal husband on any normal morning. Reading the newspaper as if he hadn't threatened to torture me alive just hours earlier, and the terrifying part was not that he threatened me but that he meant it, and men who mean violence do not raise their voices, they do not shake, they do not rage, they make coffee and wait. And I walked into the kitchen trying to keep my heartbeat from showing on my face, because he was studying me not with suspicion anymore but with strategy, calculating whether fear alone would keep me obedient or whether he needed force. And he said good morning with a smile that made my soul tremble, because predators don't stalk constantly, sometimes they sit still and wait for the prey to collapse out of exhaustion. And I realized I could not wait for safety, I could not wait for courage, I could not wait for someday, because someday was a death sentence. And while the kids got ready for school, he whispered with his mouth inches from my ear, we're going to have a little talk tonight. After they're asleep, you owe me honesty. And I felt my knees weaken, not because of fear but because I knew what honesty meant. In his language, honesty meant confession, confession meant punishment, punishment meant blood. And I nodded, pretending to accept my fate, while inside my head something broke, not like glass but like chains, because fear had kept me alive for years. But suddenly fear became useless, because if death was inevitable, then waiting for death was pointless. And when I hugged my children goodbye before school, their small arms wrapped around my waist, I realized they might never see me again, and I whispered I love you with so much force that it felt like a last prayer. And when they left the house, something inside me woke up, something feral, something ancient, something older than fear, older than marriage, older than motherhood, the instinct to survive. And I waited until Daniel left the room, then grabbed my hidden phone and called a woman I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, a woman who used to be my closest friend until he isolated me from everyone I loved. And when she answered, her voice cracked with shock, and I said his name once quietly, and she went silent, because she understood immediately. She didn't ask for explanation, she didn't ask for proof, she didn't ask why. Now she only said one sentence, you have 1 hour, tell me where to pick you up. And I hung up and stared at the clock, knowing that 1 hour was not enough time to save all 3 of us, not enough time to get the children, not enough time to pack, not enough time to disappear safely, but enough time to live. And I started grabbing only the essentials when I heard the garage door opening, because Daniel had come back early, and panic shot through my body so violently I thought I might vomit, because predators do not give warnings, predators circle back when prey thinks it's safe. And I could hear his footsteps approaching the door, and I understood that leaving was no longer escape, leaving was survival, leaving was war, leaving was now or never. And my hands shook, not because I was afraid but because I was finally free enough to fight back. And if he walked through that door before I escaped, then part of me knew with horrifying clarity that only one of us would leave the house alive. I never believed that endings could feel heavier than beginnings, but as I stood in front of my mother's old house again, aged, fragile, and almost sinking into the earth like it was ashamed of being seen, I understood that stories don't end when we're ready. They end when there's nothing left to say, and sometimes, not even then. The sky was bruised with the muted colors of an early morning, and every breath I took felt like it carried 1,000 unsaid words. I had spent years pretending I was fine, years convincing myself I didn't need closure, didn't need answers, didn't need her. But grief doesn't go away when you ignore it, it lingers like a shadow, patiently waiting for you to stop running. I pushed the rusted gate open. The screeching noise echoed through the empty front yard, as if even the metal remembered the years of tension that hung around this place. The house smelled the same, faint dust, old wood, and something that always reminded me of winter. Maybe because winters were the loneliest. I walked inside, and the silence wrapped around me like a familiar enemy. Every wall, every stain, every broken tile was a piece of history, sharp, cold, and unforgiving. My footsteps felt too loud, like I didn't belong here anymore, like I was trespassing in a graveyard of memories. And maybe I was. I found the box she left for me on the kitchen table, small, worn, tied with a piece of string that looked too fragile to hold anything meaningful. A note was taped to the top, written in her handwriting that I hadn't seen in years but could recognize instantly. I wasn't ready. Not really. But I opened it anyway, because sometimes, life forces you forward even when you're still holding on to the past with bloody hands. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to me. Some dated before I was born, some dated when I was a child, some dated just months before she died. My hands shook as I opened the first one. The paper smelled old, but the words felt raw and alive. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know how to love without hurting. I wish someone would teach me. I stopped reading, not because the words were painful, but because they were too honest. Honesty is loud. It breaks things. That I sat on the floor, leaning against a dusty cabinet, and read another. I yell because I'm afraid. I shut down because I'm ashamed. I know you see me as a monster, but I see myself as a child trapped in an adult body, trying not to drown. I had spent my entire life believing she didn't care. Believing indifference was worse than cruelty. But reading her letters felt like someone had taken every brick I used to build my walls and shattered them. In one letter, she wrote about the day she left me at school, and I cried because I thought she wasn't coming back. I went home and cried on the bathroom floor. You think I didn't care. You think I didn't feel anything. But I broke that day. I break every day you look at me like I'm unworthy of love. I wanted to stop reading. That I wanted to run. That I wanted to scream at her for writing things she never said out loud, but I kept reading, because it was too late to ask her anything now. Letters were all I had. There was one letter where she apologized for something I didn't even remember. A small moment, barely a scratch in the timeline of my life, but it haunted her for decades. I slammed the door too hard. You weren't supposed to be behind it. I didn't see you. I heard you cry, and I froze. Not because I didn't care, but because I was terrified of becoming everything I promised myself I wouldn't be. I remembered the bruise, not the pain, just the bruise. A purple mark I wore like a secret that I never knew. It destroyed her. I kept reading, letter after letter, until my fingers shook and the words blurred. Some were angry, some were desperate, some were full of grief I never saw. But the last one was different. It was longer, heavier, and folded neatly like a gift she wanted me to open carefully. The handwriting was weaker, almost trembling. If you are reading this, then I'm gone. And I know you are angry. I know you think I abandoned you long before my body did. You deserved more than I gave you. You deserved a safe place. You deserved a love that didn't make you afraid to breathe. I failed you. I swallowed hard. The letter continued, but I want you to know something. I loved you. Not perfectly. Not gently. Not the way you needed. But fiercely. Terribly. Fully. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and the scariest. I let the paper fall for a moment because my hands couldn't hold it anymore. She wrote, "Forgive me. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve peace." Those words sat inside me like something poisonous and healing at the same time. Forgiveness, peace, closure. Big words for someone who spent their whole life running. I sat there for hours, reading everything, crying, laughing bitterly, cursing her, missing her. Every letter felt like a confession. A wound. A scar she never showed me. That I always thought my pain was unique, that I was the only one who suffered. But pain is never one-sided. That it fractures everyone involved. When I finally stood up, the room looked different, not because anything had changed, but because I wasn't looking through the same eyes anymore. People always say healing is quiet. They lie. Healing is violent. That it rips you open before it stitches you shut. I walked through the house, touching walls, remembering nights I hid under blankets to block out the arguments. I remembered the birthdays she forgot, the promises she broke, the love she never learned how to give. And I remembered how hard it was to hate her, because some part of me always hoped she would become someone new. She didn't, she couldn't, but she tried. Maybe that was enough. That I walked outside into the cold air, pressing the letters against my chest like they were fragile bones. The sun was rising, soft and forgiving. I whispered words I never thought I would say. I forgive you. Not because she earned it, not because she asked for it, but because I was tired of holding on to a story that refused to let me grow. Forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. I stared at the house one more time, letting every memory, every wound, every unanswered question fall away like dust from an old life. We were both broken. We were both scared. We were both trying to survive, and maybe that was our story, messy, painful, unfinished, but real. That I turned away and walked down the road, lighter than I had ever been. Not healed, healing. Not whole, becoming. Not free, freeing. Life doesn't give happy endings. It gives complicated truths we learn to carry, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from the past, that I was walking toward the future, and that felt like enough.